I'm Ruth Striegel. I am the music director, but not the organist at First Congregational UCC in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I have a past life as a public school orchestra director. Let's see, I'm supposed to tell you this session is being recorded. And just generally, we probably should be muted when we're not speaking. And I would invite you to put your name and location and anything else you'd like us to know in the chat. We can see that about each other. As we go through the presentation, if you want to, you can put questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand. And especially when I'm using the slideshow, that would be helpful, and I can notice you and acknowledge you. You can play around with the view, which is the upper right-hand corner, if you would like to see speaker view or gallery view. That's up to you. Our annual meeting will be on July 8th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Zoom, and you will be hearing more about that as we get closer. And yeah, so I am going to show you my slideshow, which is kind of my view of how life has changed in COVID, post-COVID times, and then how that has impacted my congregation. And I invite you to ask questions at any time that seems appropriate to you. And got to go back up here, right? So here we are. Okay. So the title of today is Finding a New Balance. And the photos are of 3 sandhill cranes that I saw in the field behind my house last fall, because we get a lot of sandhill cranes in Albuquerque. So what has happened in our lives since COVID? I don't know about the rest of you, but I got really good at online worship. That was something that we had to do for a long, long time. And staying at home became normal. We got acclimated to being alone, which is kind of weird. Eventually, we restarted in-person worship. This is a photo of our sanctuary on the first day that we had in-person worship again, which was September 2021. Some people returned joyfully. Some people couldn't wait. Some people continued to worship online because they were more comfortable that way. And some people found other things to do. So the new reality, at least for me, speaking for what I can see, is that fewer people are in worship than there were in 2019. My choir membership is down quite a bit. And some groups that were struggling to get enough people just have disappeared. We no longer have a bell choir. We were just barely hanging on by our fingernails, and that's not coming back. Technology is huge. In probably 2018, we were saying, nah, we're never going to be that church that has all those screens up in the front. Nah, we're never going to do that. And as you can see from the slide, we are that church now. We have big screens on either side of the chancel and one up on the balcony so that the people in the chancel can see the screen. We made a big investment. We raised $80,000 to get technology so we could do in-person hybrid worship. We have a technology coordinator. We have volunteers. We have 4 or 5 people volunteering every Sunday. And that has made big changes in how we do worship. We have a technology meeting 45 minutes before the worship service. We go over every element of the service. and make sure that we know what camera angles are being used and where people will stand. And we have a mic check with everybody and all that good stuff. So, how has technology impacted music and worship? So for us, we now use recorded music, which we rarely did in the past. Sometimes we use music videos. We have to have song leaders so that people who are online can hear the singing. So I have a team, there's 3 of us, and we are always standing in front of a mic and singing so that people can hear. And the result is, I think, probably that the congregation is less apt to sing themselves, partially because for a long, long time, everybody was masked. There were fewer people. And for a couple of years, nobody was singing, so they felt like they were really rusty and couldn't do it anymore. We project lyrics to everything on the screens. We no longer hand out a worship bulletin. We just put it up on the screen. We are less tied to the hymnal. So it's easier to use a wide variety of music. Since the lyrics are always projected, we don't have to print music and hand it out. And I know that that's frustrating to people who read music and would like to sing harmony parts and such, but that's where we're at. Spontaneity is very much limited. We have to make sure we're on the mic, that the camera can see us, that we don't walk around with the mic in a way that gets feedback. It's harder to interact with the congregation because of that. And the technology meeting that we have 45 minutes prior to worship really changes the Sunday schedule. I used to have choir rehearsal prior to worship. I still do, but we had to cut back on the amount of time, and we had to move it up earlier. And the choir had to get used to the fact that they would have 20 minutes of downtime after the technology meeting. So it took some work. The big deal for me, and I suspect a lot of you, is copyright, because we have to make sure we have copyright permission for anything that we do, because everything is going up online. And I'm going to pause there because I'm curious about how copyright has affected you all and anything else that you are thinking about. And I can't see my cursor, so I'm not able to stop the share. Ugh. But I would love to hear comments.
Hi, copyright has been a problem, and it's an issue, as you said, of you've got the standard licenses, but sometimes things come up. Unfortunately, in our congregation, which is much smaller than yours, we went through several transitional issues just on top of COVID happening. Our settled pastor left. We, for 6 months, had substitutes. We had an interim who unfortunately left after 6 months, and when she came in the door, we had major copyright issues because she decided that she wanted to do different things musically, and she didn't have copyright permission, and she was not listening to us. And we were telling her, you can't do this, but it was like, in one ear out the other. So it's been, and we had a hymnal issue too. We had transitioned before the settled pastor had left, and in the middle of this also our music director left. Unfortunately, we've gotten an excellent music director. We're still without a settled pastor, but the former settled pastor and our former music director had switched from New Century to Glory to God. The interim came in and threw a fit and said she wouldn't use Glory to God, and that caused a whole bunch of mess. So it's like, everything that could go wrong went wrong for a while there. But we have now kind of stabilized the ship. Since the interim has left, we've gone back to using Glory to God. A lot of that, as some of you may know, New Century does not have electronic version.
Mhm.
That was one of the reasons we were fortunate at the beginning when we had Glory to God, because it was an electronic format. It helped us tremendously.
How did you utilize that? I'm curious, Martin.
We used, well, the whole issue is about, in the early stages when we were not back in the church, we were able to project everything out because we, Glory to God, had an electronic, package. So we were able to put things up on the screen. We were able to project using that. And one of the things that saved us until for a while on the early stages before the settled pastor left, his wife was a techno expert. And she was the one, in fact, on the recording you mentioned, that this might interest you all. We were recording our hymns individually, and she was good enough, even in our little church, which we only have 80 members and average attendance of 30. When we were online, she was taking everybody's recording, splicing them together, and perfectly blending our recordings with minimal equipment.
Mhm.
Unreal. Like I said, we got through a lot, before
Yeah.
we were able to come back. But it was just amazing that. But having the other made a lot of difference, because we had transitioned to a hymnal that had electronic versions already prepackaged.
Okay, great. Yeah, I got really good at GarageBand during.
Yeah. She used GarageBand, and like I said, it was amazing, what we were able to do with a limited amount of equipment and splicing things
Yeah.
in, absolutely wonderful. But then, when her husband left as pastor, so she went, and we have a few people that are not as good, but we're regrettably, we don't have the budget that you had, to go out and redo
That was not a budget. That was totally prayer and asking people.
I wish we had. We were so limited. We're in the process now of selling our parsonage, so that's where we're at.
Okay, other people. Copyright.
Well, hello. Can you hear me? It's Peter.
Yeah. Hey, Peter.
Well, we do recording on Facebook Live, and we have our little license, and it's only 9 members in our church. And I did go to the AGO gathering when they brought somebody from New York to talk about copyright. I've been a stickler about getting copyright, and it's really hard. But my prelude or gathering music, I don't know if it's all covered because I make some of it up myself as I go. Well, I do, and I use things that I've had for decades, for 50 years. So we don't film until the very end of my prelude, so we can't have our fingers slapped, and that's fine. If something doesn't appear to be covered, I try to reach out to the composer and get permission.
Mhm.
And 1 or 2 times I thought, well, we bought this music, we're going to do it anyway. Nothing's projected, but it's to broadcast, and it's a worship service. And I talked to some lawyers, and they said, Peter, you have a church of 9 people. You'll probably just be ignored. I said, well, that doesn't change. Thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt follow the laws. So I really try to be earnest with that.
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
Thank you. I have the pleasure of knowing a man named Brad Ellingbo. Does anybody recognize his name?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So Brad lives here in Albuquerque, and I asked him, he's a choral director, and we see each other.
This is the answer machine for Joan and Ed. Please leave a message. Bye.
So I asked him, what about copyright law? Because we do his music, and he says, Chos and other publishers don't have the bandwidth to go after you because you're using my anthem. Just use it. Don't worry about it. So I try really hard to follow copyright law, and I put in manual submissions in one license, and when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And we have not been persecuted by Facebook or YouTube as a result of any of that. What else? Amanda, do you have any thoughts about this being on maybe the other side of things, even though you're giving all your music?
Well, I mean, I'm because I don't make my living writing music, I really don't want to speak for other composers and hymn writers and so on. I don't think that's fair. I am happy to keep writing music for free and making it available for free. But if I didn't have a good job that had a good salary and health insurance, I don't know that I would say that. I do know, though, I was somewhat devastated a month and a half ago to find out that Juliet Rush's In the Midst of New Dimensions apparently is not covered. So I've started sending him checks when we use it. That was quite a surprise.
Oh,
But-
we're going to use that next month.
Well, I have his address if anyone wants it.
Oh, I do, because I want to use it next month in the verse, because I met him in person at Hymn Society, and he's got the gay and straight verse, which I need. Can you please send me his address? And I'll send him some money too.
I'm gonna go grab his address and I'm literally gonna put it in the chat for anyone who wants to do that. That's
Great.
but so yeah, I mean, personally, I'm delighted that this is something I can offer, but I know so many people who are trying to make money off the music they create. I don't want to speak for them.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Amanda.
Anybody else have thoughts about copyright or adventures that you have gone through? Does any?
Ruth, may I just ask, have you found a website or any workshop through One License that you find particularly helpful and practical for our situations? I feel like that One License covers more of the traditional music that we tend to use, hymns from various hymnals and things like that. The CCLI, we rarely use any of their music because I feel like it tends to be a bit more contemporary vein. But through One License, do they have any really practical and concise instruction workshops or anything that you have discovered?
They have, I believe it's a monthly open session, a Zoom session where you can ask questions, and they have a lot of resources on their website.
Yeah.
You can look through. I don't have any magic resources. With common musical stuff, One License is awesome. With more contemporary stuff, we do use CCLI. My problem is, like, for Juneteenth, we have a group of folks that are trying to get together a service, and they want to use a recording of Mahalia Jackson. So we've been through this kind of thing before, where there's a commercial recording on YouTube, and we try to find a way to get copyright permission, and they want $500 or something, and we're like, no, not practical. So Heather, if the comprehensive One License with CCL permits streaming the hymn score, not just the lyrics, I can't speak to that. Can you talk about it, Heather?
Hi, sorry, I'm outside because I forgot about the time change. So, yeah, I'm still just not clear whether our purchase of One License and CCL cover streaming, showing, projecting the lyric, not just the lyrics to the hymn, but the notation. It's for me as a music director, like you mentioned earlier, it's kind of criminal for us to try to get congregational participation when they just see the words. How could they possibly know the notes unless it's just the old classic hymn that they know?
I think I can talk to that a little.
Thank you.
When you report to onelicense.net, you usually have the option of using it as words only or words and music. And I think if it's words and music, then you have permission to use the music on your screen or your stream.
Okay, and you do have to report anytime you use a hymn from the hymnal, right?
If it's under
Because
copyright, yes.
I just changed churches, right? And we were doing that at my previous church. But I've arrived at the new church job and they haven't been reporting the hymns. They seem to be under the understanding that just having the license was okay. So that's something that, I mean, I just have barely scratched the surface of my new job, but for sure, I think they need to be reporting the use of the hymns.
Heather, you're in Madison, yes?
Yes.
So Heather is the new music director at First Congregational in Madison, Wisconsin, site of our 2019 conference.
Hi,
And-
everybody. I
and-
heard it was a great event.
I grew up in that church, so I know it well.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful space,
it is. Yeah.
and I feel blessed for the opportunity.
Okay. Screens in the sanctuary. Still a no-no for some of you. Anybody want to talk about that? Eric, you're saying you're not a fan.
No, I think there are visual issues there, first off. And secondly, I like the congregation to sing hymns out of the hymnal. We also do a number of like, you know, substitute texts with known tunes in the service, you know, Carolyn Winfrey Gillette or whomever. And I just am not a great fan of putting those things up on the board without the music, first off. And you know, we like to try and use as many different things out of the new century as possible, and that would preclude doing that. We still do print up a bulletin for every Sunday, and it goes out electronically to those who are watching the service live stream, so they have that in front of them as well. And we do print up the words of the hymns that are in the hymnal for those people, so that when we send that out electronically, they have it in front of them as well and can sing along if they would like to, or read along with it. So I can see that there would be reasons for doing that, but I think in some sanctuaries that would be a difficult thing to just be able to see more than anything else. And I'm not crazy about how aesthetically it takes away from things in the front. It's not a judgmental thing for people, for congregations who do it. It's a wonderful thing, and if it works, that's great. But we just haven't gone across that line at all, and we haven't really had any serious discussion about doing that as a need.
It's interesting. Every church is different. Every congregation makes different choices, and that's cool. I sing in a large Methodist church a few miles away from here, in a choral group, and we give concerts there, and they don't have big screens. They have smallish screens, but they have a whole bunch of them, and that works for them. So I think we should probably continue. So I will attempt to go back to my slides. And here we go. Okay. There we go. So aging congregations. I know this is a national problem. I've heard this a number of times. Church members have died. I have been to so many funerals in the last couple of years, more than at any other time in my life. This is a picture of Lois Harwick, who came to us from Connecticut years ago. She died a while back. Joan, do you know her?
I wonder if I know of her. Yeah. Her husband was a minister.
I don't know.
Okay.
She was widowed when she came here,
Oh,
but she passed away about a year ago. I know there's probably 3 members of my choir who have died since COVID hit. We have older folks who are reluctant to venture out, and they still are worshiping online. And this leads to a loss of community, and in many places, a loss of membership. I know we have a number of people who, at least on paper, are still part of the church, but they're not showing up. Another national issue that I see is around organs and organists. So speaking to some organists here, I know that our church went up in the 1950s and our organ could use a substantial inflection of money, like $250,000 would be great. But we're not doing that. So deferred maintenance on organs, particularly when we weren't worshiping in the sanctuary. And then finding organists is more and more challenging. Our local AGO chapter is losing members and has a lot of aging members. And to some degree, this is our younger members don't care about the organ. They have different tastes in music. They would rather hear somebody play the guitar. So I know we're not unique in those aspects. That's something that happens all over the place. So my choir is down to 8 people, and I'm super fortunate to have a number of strong musicians. So we can still do 4-part music. We still have a good tenor. We still have a good alto, a good soprano, on the bass. But how I deal with choir has changed so much. I have a board up and I say, okay, who's going to be here on this Sunday and this Sunday and this Sunday? And then after I know who's going to be there, I say, we're going to sing on April 21st because that's when you'll all be here. And so we don't sing in worship nearly as often as we used to, which also means that I have more time in rehearsal to go through the nuances of music. And people have told me repeatedly that the music sounds really good, even though there's only a few people, because I have to make sure that my bass, who can't read music, can sing his music, because otherwise it just sounds terrible. So I choose anthems very carefully. And the picture is our Easter service from the chancel. You can see the screen above the balcony. Okay. Congregational singing has also changed. And I'm still a little frustrated about this because we are broadcasting, we have to sing into a mic. And because we're singing into mics, it's hard for those of us who are leading the singing to hear the congregation. And I think it kind of intimidates them, maybe. They don't sing very loudly. So we have a vocal trio and we do all the music. We sing the doxology, the hymns, everything. And we have to rehearse everything in advance. And then when I'm choosing hymns, it sounds like maybe our process is a little different than yours. We really try to find different styles, some familiar, some new, some old chestnuts, some more challenging stuff. And then musical guests become even more important because the choir is not as present. So for Easter, we had a whole church full of people for the first time in 3.5 years. It was wonderful. But I still had 8 people in the choir. So our pastor wanted a brass quintet. Great. I couldn't have the brass and the choir combined because the brass totally overwhelmed the choir. So we had the brass and we had the choir, not at the same time. And we didn't combine the brass with the organ either, because our organist is a pianist who's wonderful, but she didn't come to us as an organist, and we are paying for her to take organ lessons. So it's a process. But I'm lucky we have literally an opera singer who's a friend of ours. He lives in Santa Fe, and he came and sang for us. One of the people in my vocal trio, Andrea, is a songwriter. She does amazing stuff, and she has recorded and written and recorded songs for us. And she does 3-part harmony all by herself, layering in garage.
Funeral flowers came and I had them put them in the foyer.
We have a young man in his 30s who is he and his wife came to us from a non-denominational church where he was a music leader, so he likes to sing and play guitar, and that appeals to a certain segment in our congregation. And then we have connections with the university, and we get some cool people from there. Special music we've done, we still have a Christmas Eve string quartet. So from Peter Stickney's session, I got the idea for Palm Sunday to use shakers. So we always have a Palm Sunday parade. We parade around with our palms and sing. So I gave everybody a little shaker to jazz things up, and that was fun. And then I told you. Yeah. So let's get back to everybody. I'm not sure. Can you all see each other? Yeah. All right. So what does that bring up? What unique things have you done? Heather, you want to talk to us about what you put in the chat?
Well, I mean, it's just this overarching idea that as much as nobody wants to accept it or embrace it, I think that the whole idea of what is church is, since COVID is on a very specific path to big changes. If there is so much aging out of this kind of tradition, and we want to honor and take care of the elders, that love these traditions. But also, we're being asked to bring in the new generations, and I personally think that it's going to mean we all will have to accept that we're streaming forever now, and many people will be participants online, and all of the technology associated means technology in addition to things like changing the language and having more variety in genre of music to reach younger audiences and all of that. I mean, it's really major.
Mm-hmm.
It means different kinds of musicians with different skills. It's very expensive. High quality production value is expensive. And I see overall, I see much less volunteering. I mean, of course, we have lots of wonderful volunteers, but overall, I see much less volunteering and much higher prices for people willing to spend time to do these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess my question is, are other people feeling like it's radical like that? And, what are we going to build out of thousands and thousands of hymnals and music libraries? I have a giant music office full of music, for example. If I'm bringing up too many topics right now, what are you going to do about your music library, everybody? I open up the cabinets and every other song in there has the word Lord in it. And now people don't want to use the language of Lord. And then as a composer, I don't like changing the lyrics of the composer's work. What are we going to do about our music libraries?
Yeah, I went through my choral library during COVID when I had time. And now I have like 10 boxes of anthems that I'm never going to use again. And I'm hesitant to throw them away, but I don't know that anybody else wants a 40-year-old anthem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I might just jump in with a little different perspective.
Good.
I'm in
Great.
Sarasota, Florida. And so we have our, certainly our share of an aging congregation. But it's interesting, post-COVID is what we're talking about here.
Yep.
I have found that some of the adults, young adults that have come through our children's choir and youth choir programs from years past are returning to church. And church attendance, a young man and his girlfriend are attending every single Sunday. I haven't seen them in years. And they're probably early 30s, but they grew up in the church and they're returning to that tradition and finding comfort. And
That's great.
he has said to me that they tried worshiping online, but he said there's just nothing like being in the sanctuary.
Right.
And the feel of that. And so I think I'll give you another example. I've just the most recent weddings I've had 3 weddings, and I always do a consultation and offer the pre-service music to be played on either the organ or the piano. And if they want a little more casual kind of a setting for the piano, all 3 just in the past few months have said, oh no, we want the pipe organ, So I find that encouraging that post-COVID, people are seeking some of the traditions that they grew up in, and these are younger people. And so I think they're certainly interested in returning to some of those traditions. Granted, I mean, we could spend all day talking about how we have to be faithful to inclusive language and how we have to be faithful to all kinds of diversity that is represented in our churches now. But I don't want to throw those traditions out with the bathwater, because I think that there are young people that are still wanting to return to that. In general, we do a good job of live streaming. And frankly, I will admit to snooping on some of my favorite churches that live stream and do a really great job at that. But I find at home, I don't sing along with the hymns, no matter how wonderfully those hymns are presented. And so there's a different, I believe, a chemical reaction to being with a body of people and that breath and the vibrations. And we're seeing a pretty strong return of that. My choir is in Florida is stronger than ever. So, every situation is different. And I think that I remember hearing someone in a workshop along the line say, don't focus on what you cannot do, but what you can do. And I think those situations are different. And I'm an advocate of saying, let's return to some of the things that we are, let's not try to be something that we're not. We have to stretch and find new ways to be effective and to minister with programming and in worship. I agree with all of that, but don't throw away the personality of who you are as a church. Is what I'm saying, because there's great value in that.
Of course, yeah. I'm all about the in-person as well. Thank you for sharing that. It's very encouraging.
We've had interesting, that Gregory mentioned. We had to get a new music director, and we had the situation where our prior music director for 8 years, she was an excellent musician. She trended more toward contemporary. She only played piano and would not touch the organ. We hired a new director who is an excellent organist, and he also happens to be an even better pianist than our former director. But we got an older gentleman who's in his early 70s, has 4 years of experience in various denominations, including UCC. And it's been amazing, since we got the organ back. Now we had an electric Rogers, and some of you may know this who've dealt with electric. It was built in the 90s because it sat for 8 years. All the glue melted versus the keys, and we had to end up spending almost $3,000 to overhaul the keyboard. But it's working now, and he's doing a tremendous job as organist. We recently, in fact, this past week, one of our members is downsizing, who's in her mid-80s. We just got her baby grand piano, and we're able to give her the upright because the upright will fit in her new senior retirement community. So sometimes things happen. The membership is the same issue of, due to deaths and transitions, we're dealing with 7 to 8 people, but we've got, as Ruth had indicated, we've got good musicians. We are trying to vary the music as much as we can. 2 of the things that have helped us, one of them that was a gift to us, unfortunately, because of COVID. My wife and I had moved to the UCC church we're in now from a Methodist church a few miles from where we were at. They closed their music program during COVID, and they don't even have a music director anymore. They also had, when we were there, a scholarship soprano soloist. They laid her off, and we managed to scrape up the money. We got her. She is terrific. She is classically trained, but she is an African American, and she can, knock the lights out of the house on spirituals. It's just been wonderful to have her abilities there. We have an interesting, our bass soloist. He actually lived in Hawaii and plays the ukulele, of all things. Well, so we throw him on into the rotation. The issues on the language, we were all dealing with that. Recently, our music director and I had started looking around for some different solo work, and I stumbled upon some solo work written by Tom Trenny, who I know is a member of this association. And my director and I have been doing that. He's been pulling his hair out at times, having to deal with 9/8 and 7/8, but he's doing it, and we're making it work.
Okay. Joan.
I'm wondering if music programs are being tapped to somehow solve the problem of missing people. And are musicians being asked to do more than they ever did before? I know my husband
Yes.
has been asked that, and he's already giving more than what they're paying him. He's already giving more to the church, and now the minister says, "Oh, people are not singing the hymns very well. Can the choir please stay downstairs to help sing the hymns and not be up with the organ?" And on the summer programs, when it's not there during the summer, can we hire people to do this and that? And that costs money, and it's time for him to arrange it. And I'm wondering if people are getting tapped out for more than they should be for the music program to solve problems.
Well, I can certainly speak about the fact that there is no payment to musicians of any sort in my congregation. I mean, I volunteer my services as a member. The music director, whose only real obligation is assembling a small choir every so often to do some special music, is also a member. We don't get paid for this. And I mean, I think a lot of the time we're happy to support our congregation. It's a way we can be part of the community and give back and so on. But I won't lie. I mean, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to have to prepare all of the music every week on top of the other things I do. And it's not that I want to get paid. I wish we had a greater diversity of people to sort of take up the work, but we're a small congregation and we don't. So I'm guessing that people in my sort of situation, sort of the volunteers, I suspect that exhaustion is getting pretty common.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Ed, unmute, Ed. Oops. Unmute, Ed.
Okay, since I was talked about, there's one more thing that my minister asked. She really wants to have more more outside instrumentalists and singers participate at least once a month in our worship service. And so she would, and we do have a music fund where we could pay for that. But and it was great when we had an oboe player a couple of weeks ago. But, you know, I'm thinking, well, how many hours of work did it take me to arrange hymns and arrange anthems so that I could use these instrumentalists in a creative way throughout the whole service? We had a college honor string quartet come down to play for us. And so we did the Ave Verum of Mozart, and, you know, that was no problem. I could get parts, but then I had to arrange for the quartet for 4 other things that we were doing in the service. And so I had to tell the minister, well, you know, I'm already, you know, I'm supposed to be 15 hours a week. And what am I supposed to give up if we're going to have to do something like that at least once a month? So, you know, that's kind of another of the aspects of what Joan was just talking about.
Yeah. Did your minister hear you when you said that?
Oh, and she said, oh, I know it's taking more work.
Okay. And are you being paid for that extra work? No.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
All right.
Can I add to what Greg said earlier about post-COVID resurgence of younger people, younger families? We've found that since we've been live streaming, a lot of young families have been looking for a place to worship where they feel comfortable, where they feel welcome, where they feel no judgment, and where they can participate in the service, but also in mission outreach things. You know, we have a community garden, we have a bunch of social issue groups and those kinds of things. And we found that we've gained more younger people now since the pandemic because of that. You know, we've been an ONA church here in central Pennsylvania since well, for 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th year this year. And that seems to be bringing people in as well, people looking for that welcoming kind of congregation and a non-judgmental kind of congregation. And but we've had this influx of younger people because of it. And our little kids choir is way up. My youth choir is up a handful of kids, and the chancel choir, I'm up to almost 40 on the rolls right now. But I mean, they don't all show up every week, and they don't come to every rehearsal and that kind of thing. But, you know, we have the policy that if you're there, you're there. If you're not, we know you're doing something that's important and you can't be there, or you're sick or whatever. So, you know, we've had a major influx of people since the pandemic, and I have a feeling it has to do a lot with the openness and the welcomeness and the you know, the non-judgmental thing, and I don't know whether that has any bearing. As to congregational singing, you know, I've just been of the belief that the more of it you do, the better and more confident they get. Now, my choir sits in the congregation because we can't fit in the choir loft anymore, which was in front of, is in the chancel area. So we sit in the congregation and sing nice and strong, and everybody else seems to sing nice and strong. And we have hanging microphones that carry that through to the live stream, as opposed to having anybody soloing with the hymns. But we put the onus back on the congregation to do the singing, of responses and hymns and so forth. And I think that's really important. Now, if the numbers aren't there, I understand that can be difficult. I'm just, you know, and I go in front of the congregation to teach them new songs every now and again, and to encourage them to sing stronger, or to clap along, or to whatever it is that we do that week. So that kind of putting the participation back on the congregation, I think, is really important, as opposed to some of these, and again, trying not to be judgmental, but some of these mega churches where they're being entertained, they're being sung at, as opposed to being sung with. So it's my perspective. Thanks for listening to that.
Okay, we are getting short on time, so I'm gonna do the wrap up, and if people still want to have conversations, that's awesome, we can do that. So we will have more Saturday sharings in the future. So keep your eye on your email. If you haven't checked out our wonderful website, it's ucma.wildapricot, and it's amazing. We have an amazing journal that Eric puts together, and that is on the website, and we are celebrating 30 years of our organization.
Hooray.
Hooray. And Peter's Epiphanies from the Millhouse is also a monthly column on the website. So there's lots of really great stuff. And looks like that's the end of my slideshow. All right. So anybody have final thoughts?
One quick final thought. I'm putting on my other hat. I retired from my full-time job last July after 38 years with the Maryland State Health Department. So I was in the middle of COVID to the teeth of this whole process. This has been tough on everybody, but churches especially. I think we had a lot of issues on masking because of my health department position. I was able to go in and basically lay down the law to the congregation and say, if we're coming back, we're wearing masks, we're doing this. We have a very small sanctuary. I said, we just can't take risk, of infecting this, especially our older members who were the ones most likely. And even in the last 2 months, we've had 3 of our older members come down with COVID. So it's still a tough issue out there. And I think, we all wish it would go away. It's not. And in case you haven't heard recently, the CDC has changed their guidelines. If you're over 65, you can get another COVID shot. So, yeah, the bivalent shot, which they came out, they just changed it 2 weeks ago. So anybody over 65 or anybody with compromised immune systems are now eligible for another vaccine of COVID.
Okay. Yeah. COVID has not gone away.
No, it's not. We all wish it would.
Yeah.
Ruth, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas. It's been so practical and really honest about where so many of us are. And certainly thank you for that. Yeah. I encourage all of you to, we talk about being overworked and more demands being placed on the music in the church and the time that takes to do so and to prepare and plan and to implement. Don't forget to communicate with your ministers. That's the last thing I would say. That marketing cannot be all on the shoulders of music. And I find that, I know that I can live for a week on one good compliment. And so be sure you're communicating with your ministers and what your perspective of things are, and spend some time really with them to I know that that's opening a whole nother can of worms, but if we can all come together in a vision of what worship can be, it's really wonderful. Yeah, in each of our situations. But Ruth, again, just thank you for sharing this such practical look upon where we are in this situation.
Pleasure.